Welcome to my channel. I am here to tell you a story about the scariest thing I've ever heard through a baby monitor. But first, do me a favor. Stay until the end, and forget to subscribe so you'll be the first to see my next story. In a nice suburban neighborhood in Michigan, Emily and Mark had just welcomed their first child into the world. Little Noah was a healthy, happy baby who slept well during the day and at night. Mark and Emily loved nothing more than spending time watching their infant son grow and change. Like most new parents, Mark and Emily worried about their baby's safety, and since they lived alone, they had purchased a high-end baby monitor with night vision, so they could keep an eye on Noah at all times. The first week went by peacefully and quietly. Every night, Emily often sat in the living room while Noah slept in his crib in the nursery. She'd watch his tiny chest rise and fall with each breath and listen to the soft sound of his breathing. It brought her great comfort to know that he was right upstairs, sleeping soundly. Then one night, everything changed. Emily was sitting in the living room watching TV, when suddenly the screen on the baby monitor flickered. Startled, she looked away and then back again, and that's when she saw it. There was a dark shape on the screen moving slowly between the crib and the window. Emily froze, unsure of what she was seeing. She told herself it must have been a trick of the light or maybe some sort of bug in the monitor. But as she continued to watch, the dark shape seemed to move again. Emily jumped off the couch and ran up the stairs to check on Noah. Bursting into the nursery, she found him sleeping soundly in his crib. The room was completely still. There was no sign of any disturbance or anyone else. Reassured that everything was fine, Emily returned downstairs to watch Noah through the monitor. The following night, Mark was in the living room when he heard faint static coming from the monitor. As he listened intently, he could have sworn he heard a whisper. The voice was barely audible, but it sent shivers down his spine. It sounded like a woman saying, "Don't let him cry." Mark turned to Emily, his face pale and mouthed the words for her to hear. Emily shook her head, thinking that Mark must have misheard it. She told him it was probably just interference from a neighbor's baby monitor. But Mark wasn't so sure. He felt a growing unease about the situation and couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Over the next few days, the whispers continued to grow more distinct. Sometimes they would laugh, sometimes they would weep, and occasionally they would seem to be having a heated argument. Emily and Mark would discuss the strange occurrences, but Emily always dismissed them as figments of Mark's imagination. She suggested that he was tired and overworked and that was causing him to hear things that were you and there. Mark, however, knew what he was hearing, and he couldn't understand why Emily refused to believe him. On the 10th night, Emily and Mark were watching Noah sleep in the nursery when they heard a knock. Startled, they looked up to see a small wooden box sitting on the dresser. The box was intricately carved and had an eerie, otherworldly vibe. Emily and Mark exchanged nervous glances. They had no idea where the box had come from or what it contained. Fearful of what they might find, they decided to leave it alone for now. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. Emily and Mark huddled together on the couch, listening intently. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream followed by an ominous thud. Rushing upstairs, they found Noah in his crib, eyes wide with terror, as if he had seen something terrifying. But when they checked the room, they found nothing out of the ordinary. Shaken by the experience, they returned to the living room, determined to catch whatever was haunting their baby. With trembling hands, they set up 3 cameras around the nursery, recording continuously. Then they retreated to the living room, holding their breath as they watched the monitors. After hours of waiting, they began to lose hope. Just as they were about to call it a night, one of the cameras flickered, revealing something terrifying. A tall, thin figure stood at the foot of Noah's crib, its head bent at an unnatural angle, its hands hovering just inches above their sleeping baby. The couple watched in horror as the figure approached the crib, its eyes fixed on their sleeping son. They had never seen the figure so clearly before, and its presence filled them with dread. Desperate to protect their baby, Emily and Mark called a local paranormal researcher named Sarah, hoping she could help them uncover the truth behind the haunting. Sarah arrived at their home with an array of tools and equipment used to detect paranormal activity. She began by interviewing Emily and Mark, gathering information about the strange events they had been experiencing. As they recounted their story, Sarah took notes and asked follow-up questions, trying to piece together the timeline of the haunting. She then began using her equipment to measure electromagnetic fields, temperature fluctuations, and sound levels in the house, all of which are commonly associated with paranormal activity. Meanwhile, Emily and Mark watched anxiously as Sarah investigated their home. They were desperate for answers, but also terrified of what she might find. Finally, Sarah gathered Emily and Mark in the living room to share her findings. She explained that their home had once been the site of a tragic fire at an orphanage that had burned down in the 1960s. Dozens of children had perished in the blaze, and their spirits were now haunting the house. As Sarah spoke, Emily and Mark felt a chill run down their spines. They had no idea about the history of their home, and the presence of the spirits terrified them. Sarah then turned to the monitors displaying the nursery, pointing out the figure that had appeared in the recording. She believed that the figure was the spirit of one of the children from the orphanage, and that it was drawn to Noah because of his innocence and purity. Emily and Mark were horrified to learn the truth about their home, but they were also desperate to protect their baby from the malevolent spirit. Sarah suggested several ways to try to appease the spirit, such as performing a seance or using holy water. But Emily and Mark were skeptical and unsure if these methods would work. They knew they had to take action, but they weren't sure what to do. Emily and Mark decided to leave their home and move to a new location where they could raise their baby in peace. Before they went, they made sure to clear out the nursery, including the monitor. They never looked back. Now, whenever the new owners turned on the monitor, they could hear the whispers of the spirits, calling out to them in the dead of the night. The baby monitor was left in the nursery, forgotten and abandoned. Who knows what secrets it holds? But one thing is for sure. It's not just a device for keeping an eye on your baby. It's a portal to another world. A world where the spirits of the dead linger and whisper, waiting for someone to hear their cries. If you think your baby monitor is safe, think again. Sometimes it reveals more than just your child's sleep. Subscribe for more. See you next time.